Welcome to the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell, and I'm here to help you excel through the stories you tell. But being a compelling business storyteller is hard for some because it takes focused, deliberate practice. That's why I consult, teach, coach, and speak internationally, helping leaders just like you become confident and persuasive communicators, to help you connect with audiences like you never have before, and to excite them to action. I would be delighted to bring you and your team one of my in-person or virtual storytelling mastery classes or mastery course. Or you can even take advantage of my ABTs of Selling online training right now. Either way, please let me know when I can bring the business of story to your world. And until then, enjoy today's show. I'm so glad you're here. Let's face it, if you're going to succeed at selling, then you know you need to confidently connect with that buyer or prospect sitting across from you. But you won't connect if you don't appreciate their personality archetype and what kinds of stories you need to share with them. Today, we're going to explore the 6 buyer archetypes you are most likely to encounter in your sales and how you can win them over by connecting with their view of the world through the stories you tell.
The Inquisitor, I find in most instances, will respect you for challenging them because you're not just backing off. Some of them actually get a lot of satisfaction of seeing you squirm in the chair. By coming back to them with those success stories and throwing the questions back at them as to the what if you didn't do this. Throw those things back. And the Inquisitor, I think, in a lot of instances will respect you for the challenge back to them.
Wayne Maloney is an Australian business growth specialist with a global background and is co-author of the new book, The Wentworth Prospect, a novel guide to success in B2B sales. For over 4 decades, in roles from salesperson to managing director, he helped a diverse range of businesses in Australia, Asia, and Europe achieve their revenue and profit goals. Since leaving his corporate career, Wayne has spent over 15 years helping B2B organizations tackle their business growth challenges through the application of sound sales and business strategies, developing salespeople, and applying lean principles for sustainable sales success. So please welcome to the Business of Story, Wayne Moloney. Wayne, welcome to the show.
No, thank you, mate. I'm really looking forward to our chat, and especially around storytelling. We've both got a bit of a passion around that. I know, so it should be a lot of fun.
Now, you don't sound like you're from around these parts. Where are you coming to us from?
No, I'm in what you guys call down under. I'm down in Australia, beautiful part of Australia, just west of Sydney, in an area known as the Blue Mountains, and we've got a beautiful spring day here today, and I've got some beautiful king parrots just sitting on the balcony outside there looking at me and waiting for their feed for the morning.
What's a king parrot look like?
A king parrot is a beautiful bird. It's what we'd call a mid-sized parrot. It's smaller than the cockatoo, which most people know. And they're a beautiful red and green, bright red and bright green. If you use the right colours, I think you would say they are cardinal and myrtle. But yeah, beautiful red and green bird. So my favourite, very timid, very tame. Even the wild ones, they'll sit on your arm and feed, which is a beautiful way to have them around. It's great. Even while we're in lockdown, at least we've got that around us.
So they won't peck your nose off then, huh?
No, not like the cockatoos, mate. You're going to lose a finger if you try and feed those by hand.
So you guys are in lockdown, and that's the strangest thing to me with COVID. Not that you're in lockdown, just the whole dichotomy of COVID. Here you guys are. And how long have you been locked down? You've been stuck in your house for how long?
Here in Sydney, I think we're in our 12th week now.
12th week. And here in America, we're wide open. We've got college football going, which is one of my favorite sports. The stadiums are packed. You don't hear anything about super spreader events. I just don't understand this COVID thing, along with lots of other people. Should you be locked down? Should you not be locked down? Do you get a vaccination? Do you not? Do you wear a mask? It is just bananas out there.
Yeah, it is. And look, we're a little bit like you. Australia, most people don't realise it, but Australia is a group of federated states. So each state is independent, and we have a national government very similar to how the US operates. And we've got states here that have got tightly closed borders. And here in New South Wales, it looks as though we're going to be able to travel international before we're actually able to travel to a couple of the states in Australia. So, yeah, it's quite a bizarre, just bizarre the whole way it's working. And like you, we've got states that we've got our Australian football grand final coming up in 2 weeks. They've got a 60,000 seat stadium in Western Australia sold out for that. And then we've got other games in states being played in empty stadiums. So, yeah, it's just bizarre.
There's no rhyme nor reason to it. And what, we were talking about on an earlier show is this open story loop that we have with COVID, because there's no closure to it. And so we are stuck here in our homes, you more so than us, but wondering what is going to happen and what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest problem is social media is great for a lot of things, but it's also a great way to spread misinformation. And the unfortunate thing that's happening with COVID, as happens with so many things, there's so much information out there, and people are so free to spread whatever stories they want. People just get confused. It's one of the things that I talk about in selling is, that tsunami of information that's out there at the moment. Buyers have got so much more opportunity to learn about things, but how do they make sense of that information?
Well, let's dive right into that, Wayne. You are a sales strategy consultant, and you've got a new book out, The Wentworth Prospect, that we're going to talk a little bit about. And I'm particularly interested in the 6 buyer archetypes and the kinds of stories that you got to tell them. But first, give us your backstory.
Yeah, look, I started my career as a mechanical engineer. I went through all of my high school years thinking that was where I wanted to be. After I got into it, was really not something that I was enjoying the way I thought I would. And I had a bit of I was only working in a small engineering company, and I had a disagreement with the owner of that business. And he probably did the biggest favor anyone's done for me in my career. He suggested that maybe I should be looking for something other than working for him. And that led me, a friend of mine, his father was in sales, and he gave me an opportunity there. And that was where it all started. I grew to be initially, I insisted on calling myself a sales engineer, which when I look back at, I'm a bit embarrassed about. But yes, sales became my career, and I've enjoyed various aspects of sales, but always focused on business development. So not always just sales, but all of the aspects that you need to develop a sustainable revenue and profit stream for an organization.
Were you reluctant to go into that sales role, thinking you'd never be a sales guy, a salesperson?
No, I don't think so. My dad, he'd been in B2C, and he'd been a sales manager of all things for a bakery. And, he'd worked in the B2C space. And my mother and my aunts had all worked in retail. So I guess there was no embarrassment about going into sales. And there was no, look, to be quite honest, going back in those days, the thought of having an expense account in a company car probably offset anything when I was, what was I, probably 21, 22 at the time. So all of those things were pretty attractive. And I soon learned that, yeah, they were great rewards, but it was just the whole aspect of sales and being able to get out there from an engineering perspective and be able to help people come up with solutions to problems in their business, which, yeah, I did from an engineering perspective, but that was always the follow-up to the work that had been done by the people that had presented those solutions and helped people understand what the outcomes were that they were looking for.
So what is your one thing after all these years in your line of work that really separates you from other sales strategists and consultants?
There's so many people out there and so many good salespeople, and there's a lot that aren't so good either. But I don't think there's any one thing that separates people. It's doing the first thing I see is doing the basics right. You need to understand what the basics are, and you need to master those. It's like, you and I were talking about sport just before we started recording this. And you look at any elite sports person, once they go into a bit of a rut, the first thing their coach does is take them back to the basics. Whether it be Tiger Woods with golf, he goes back to his swing coach, and they get the swing right, they get the stance right. It's exactly the same with sales. You need to have those basics right. And I'm a really strong advocate of not looking for that shiny new thing that's going to help you make your target automatically or with little effort. Is get the basics right. The other thing is always focusing on value. You need to be focusing on the value that you deliver to the customer. It's not about what you think is value. The only person that can define value is the prospect or the customer. So you need to work with them to help them, take them on a thinking journey, if you like, to understand what it is that's going to be valued for them in either improving the way they do business to improve their profitability and increase revenue, or to address problems that they might have in the business. And the last thing is, and I guess this comes from my engineering background, Park, is I'm a really strong advocate of the lean principles. And the lean principles basically came from manufacturing. A lot of people credit it to Toyota, but it was actually the US that introduced it to Toyota post World War II. And I've applied that to selling for all of my career. Initially, not knowing that I was doing it, but then later on, starting to define true lean principles in selling. And the three basic principles are reduce waste, create value, and continual improvement. And I look at applying those to the way that I sell.
So let's go back to the top very, very quickly,
Yeah.
because I also want to talk about the thinking journey. So you said focus on the basics. What
Yeah.
are the basics in your mind?
Yeah, look, that's I get asked that question a lot. And one day I might sit down and actually write out a list of what those basics are. But it all starts with attitude. That's the first thing. Is you and I, well, we spoke earlier about me wanting to be called a sales engineer. I didn't have the right attitude when I went into selling. I still saw, despite the fact that my family had been in sales, I still saw myself as coming down a little bit in my profession, moving from being an engineer to a salesperson. So you need that right attitude. You need to understand that you can win, and you need to understand that sales is not like the old snake oil salespeople. Sales is really about helping people achieve a better outcome to where they are. So that's the first thing. You've got to have that attitude correct. The second thing is that you need to understand that there's no shortcuts. Selling is hard work if you do it properly. And you need to have a process, and a process that you follow, and a process that helps you identify the real opportunities to be working on, and then work through that process to be able to, again, I speak about the thinking journey, but to align with the way your buyer is going to buy and help them through that buying process. So there was some research done by the Sales Management Association in the US, I think it was, and they were saying that organizations that have a process and follow that process properly and religiously, they end up generating 18% more revenue growth year on year than businesses that don't. So a process is absolutely essential, and it's a basic. I have a process that I work, but I'm not saying that that's the process. It's one that I follow, and it's one that I use with my clients, and it works very well. But you must have a process that helps you identify the real opportunities and identify what it is that makes that a real opportunity, so that you can cut from that chase very quickly so that you're not wasting time. I mentioned waste earlier. So they're two things: attitude and having a process to follow. They're two of the basics that you really need to master. And the other is, it's about prospecting. There's a friend of mine in the US, a lady called Joanne Black, and Joanne works a lot with referral selling. And she's trademarked the term pick up the damn phone. Now, these days, people just don't understand what the phone was basically there for. The phone was there to talk to people, and we've forgotten to do that. And these days, even more so here in Australia at the moment, where there's so much lockdown with COVID, picking up the phone and talking to people is a basic that so many salespeople have lost. And we really need to go back to that and understand it. It's about engagement. I still use envelopes, letters, and stamps to engage with people. A short story, and I know you're into stories, but I mentored at one of our local universities at their incubator, and lots of really smart young guys coming through there, guys and girls that have got great business opportunities. They're all startups, and I was mentoring one young guy, really sharp bloke, and he had a great business idea. And he said to me, I just can't get to decision makers. I can't get to the right people. I send them emails, I try and talk to them on the phone, but no one comes back to me. And I said, have you sent them a letter? And he sat there and he was dumbfounded. He just looked at me as if, what are you talking about? And I said, well, write them a letter, find something that's of interest that you think will be useful to them that relates to your product or service, put it in an envelope, write their name on the front of it, put a stamp on it, and mail it. And he reluctantly agreed to do that. And 2 weeks later, he rang me and said, I've got an appointment. The guy rang me, said he was amazed that someone would take the effort to actually send him a letter, and I've got an appointment. So, that's nothing's more basic than a letter, an envelope, and a stamp, but it cuts through. And they're the sorts of things that people need to be able to do.
Don't we just so get away from that interpersonal communication and that engagement because of digital, because of our technology, and we just think everybody is stuck on their phones and their computers, and something is simple. I even do handwritten notes
Yep.
and mail them off, and it freaks people out. I've got an old typewriter, an old Smith Corona typewriter, 1953. Unfortunately, it got smashed in my move, but for 3 years, I would type away and send notes, and I had people in my office come in and they would say, it's so soothing to hear that typewriter. There's something,
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, and look, it's been a long time since I've heard a typewriter in an office that I've been in, and I don't have one, although my wife has got one, but it's stored away. Yeah, but you're right, that sort of thing, and again, it just cuts through. It shows that you care, and
Mhm.
you know, empathy is so important in selling. And if you've taken the time to do something a little different, to send out something that shows that you've taken time rather than just do that bulk email to people, rather than use some sort of artificial intelligence to reach out to people, that's what's going to help you cut through, and that's what's going to help you stand out. And we know people buy, it might be B2B, but it's still P2P. You know, people buy from people, and people buy from people they know, like, trust, and respect. And if you take that effort initially, they will get to know you. They will get to like you a lot quicker because you're taking that effort, and that trust and respect can then be built on the back of that. So, yeah, I mean, maybe I should pull my wife's typewriter out and take that step backwards as well.
You know what? I'm going to coin a new phrase here with you, Wayne. Start using official intelligence versus artificial intelligence.
Yeah, well, that's great, isn't it? Yeah, we should do that.
There you go. Tell me about, and then we're going to jump into your book and we're going to cover these 6 archetypes because I'm very curious about the story, what these archetypes are and the stories you tell. Tell us about this concept of the thinking journey and how that helps you see the world from your customer's point of view.
Well, it's not actually us seeing the world from the customer's point of view, but it's helping the customer see their world from a different point of view. We talk about, in the book, we've got a process called advance, and the E stands for engage, and that's about building your profile, engaging with your market, engaging with your ideal customer, and then getting to the point where you're engaging with the individual. The D is for disrupt and discover. And what we talk about there is you need to get down. I talk about getting down in the trenches with your prospect. You need to understand their business. You need to engage with them at a level where you can understand how they're doing business. And through the domain expertise you would have, and from the experience you've gained from working with clients that have had similar sorts of issues, you can understand some of the ways that they could do business better. So your role as a salesperson is to take them on a thinking journey, a journey of discovery, which allows them to write their own value proposition on moving from their current state to an objective that is a better future state. Now, that could be to overcome a problem, or it could be to improve the way they do business to increase revenue, increase customer satisfaction, improve profits, or improve the work environment for their staff. So that's what we're talking about there, is working with them step by step, open the gate, close the gate behind you as you take them through that journey to get to a point where they're able to do business better than when they first engaged with them. So it's getting them to think about that. I won't use the word utopia, but that state that is, much better than where they're at the moment. And if they've got a problem, that state is solving that problem. If they don't have a problem, but they're not doing business to the best of their peers, it's taking them on that journey to understand how they could be doing business better and being more competitive in the marketplace.
Now, you cover this concept in your new book, The Wentworth Prospect, a novel guide to success in B2B sales.
Yeah.
How did this book come about, and why did you lean so heavily on storytelling to essentially give the reader sales training?
If you'd asked me that question 6 years ago when we started, I would be excited about the answer. Now, 6 years later that we're finished, I'm excited because we're finished. And, there was a lot of work in between it. I'd written 2 books previously, one on sales management and one on the B2B sales basics. And I always wanted to write one on strategic or more complex selling. And my friend John Smybert and I had done quite a bit of work together over the years. And John also had been working on the advanced sales process, which I'd been helping him with. And I approached John about writing the book. And he jumped at the idea, said that would be great. But then a mutual friend, and someone I think you know, Mike Adams, who wrote the book, The 7 Stories Every Salesperson Must Tell, Mike suggested that, why don't you try doing a story? And John said, that'd be great. Let's write a novel. And John and I, if I think about it, we decided that writing a novel, yeah, that's a great idea. But it wasn't long before we realized that we were good sales consultants and not very good novelists. And therefore, we approached a good friend of mine, Jeff Clulow, who comes from an advertising background and is a budding novelist in his retirement. And Jeff actually sat with us and he learnt what we were doing from a technical perspective, and we worked with him to turn that into a story. And the whole purpose behind that, Park, is people learn much better from a story. They remember stories. They don't remember where you take people through a list of things. And if I look back at all of the sales books, or the previous sales books I wrote, were written as handbooks so that you could look at a specific area of selling, go in, learn about that, and then close the book and go away. We didn't want, with complex selling, to take people through a process where we were going, you have to do this, and then you have to do this, and then you have to do this. It's dry. It's not real world because it doesn't take into account the personalities that you meet as you're going through that sales process. It doesn't take into account the struggles that you might with a sales manager who's pushing you to make your number, but you need to be working in a more structured way to win this business. It doesn't take into account the personalities of the people that you're meeting within the client. And we all know that there's more and more people involved in the buying cycle. So how do you address those people? How do you address the people that are in favor of the solution or the work that you might want to, or the proposal you might want to put forward, against the people that might favor one of your competitors? The only way you could do that was to actually put it into a story. So we chose a young sales girl, Sue, and without giving too much away, her mentor, her boss, dies in the first chapter, but he left a memoir, effectively a manuscript of the advanced sales process, and she uses that to work her way through with one of her colleagues to close the deal with the Wentworth Bank, hence the name, the Wentworth Prospect.
So, Wayne, thank you for the premise of your book. Now let's dive into what really has me fascinated, is how you guys pulled out these archetypes that we are all selling to, and the different kinds of stories we have to tell depending on who that gatekeeper is in front of us. So where do you want to begin? What's the first archetype you think that we most often come across?
Well, let's first talk about the two groups of archetypes. We've actually identified six that we believe people are going to come across in a B2B strategic or more complex sale, and we've broken them down into change agents and advocates. And the three change agents are those that have got the power or the influence to be able to make change or drive consensus within the organization. The advocates, while they don't have that power to drive consensus or make change, they're the ones that may be able to introduce you to a change agent, and being able to work with them will help you in the development of your proposal through the organisation. So, I guess in answer to your question, which is the most common? That depends very much on the organisation, but the one that you've got to get to, the most powerful change agent, is your champion. That's the person that, through either personality or position, they're the ones that are going to be able to drive consensus and drive your proposal internally. So they're your ally, and they're the ones you've got to get to and have on side. Now, there could be negative champions. They could be a champion for your competitor, but you've got to find someone that's going to support your proposal and help you internally to get to the right people. And as I said, drive consensus for the proposal part.
So, is there any way of overcoming a negative champion?
It's really difficult to overcome them. The best way, of course, is to work with your positive champion. And in the book that we spoke about, there is a negative champion, and that person's very much aligned with the incumbent competitor. And the heroine, Sue, in the book, she actually does it by working with all of the other stakeholders and basically isolating the negative champion until it gets to a point where they're doing the authentication. And at that point in time, they're able to bring that person around.
So, man, you really have to have a strategy in place if you're going to come across and you've identified you've got a negative champion there that you have to somehow overcome. And what are the kinds of stories you might tell that negative champion to win them over?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things there. There's two stories, and I class them as success stories and company stories. Um, your success stories are recounting the successes that you've had with other customers, and the other is the company story, and that's telling how the company was formed, how the company's overcome obstacles and went on to be successful. Because the champion, whether they be positive or negative, they're focused on getting the job done and they're focused on results. And they respond to organizational success and methodology of delivery. They're the sort of things that they're looking at. So your stories need to evoke that emotion of the success and the emotion of being able to get the results done. So they may still be negative to you because they support your competitor, but you need to be able to show them that regardless of them being, I guess, supportive of someone else, that your company is capable of delivering the results that are required. So they're looking at that big picture of delivery.
Yeah. What are some of the other change agent archetypes that you come across?
Yeah, look, we've broken it, as I said, into three, and we've got the champion that I just mentioned. The other is the sage, and the sage is, again, a powerful change agent, and they're really looking at communicating the idea, and they're focused on the big picture. And then the other one is the Inquisitor, and I think we've all come across the Inquisitor in deals that we've worked on, and they're the ones that are going to interrogate your proposal. They're the ones that are really they're going to seek the truth. They're going to look for quantifiable evidence, and they're going to tear your proposal apart. And they can be a great ally, because if they tear it apart and can't come up with any real issues that are going to be negative towards that proposal being implemented and delivering a positive outcome, they can also then be a positive influence towards a negative champion. So you need to be mindful of how you tell these stories in a way that they can then be used and passed on to others within the organization. And that's, as you'd know, Park, that's a great thing about telling stories. Stories are easy to relay onto other people because they don't have to be 100% accurate. You get across that the intent of the story and you get across the emotion, and that's easily done in a story. Whereas if you're asking someone to go through the facts and this and this and this, they're going to miss something or they're not going to communicate it properly. Stories let you do that much easier. So you need to be pushing stories through. If you're looking at the Inquisitor, for example, you're looking there at stories that demonstrate strong domain expertise and commercial acumen for yourself and the company. You're looking again at the success stories that I spoke about earlier. And, you need to be armed with evidence and facts to support those stories that you're telling, because they're going to dig deep and they're going to ask you questions about that. And don't be afraid to tell personal stories, and personal stories that open you up as authentic, stories of where you may have failed and what you've learned from that failure and how that's helped you become better at what you're delivering and working with clients like the one you're with at the time.
It seems to me like an inquisitor is just really looking for the truth no matter what. And it can probably even make you a little bit nervous because you got someone just breathing down your neck. And if you can pass that stress off and just be your authentic self, no BS. I suppose the Inquisitor has the largest BS meter going. And if you can overcome that and just say, hey, here's what we've got going on and authentically deliver your goods, then you're going to win over that Inquisitor.
Yeah, and that's really important because, as I said, the Inquisitor, if you get other people are going to look to the Inquisitor, and as you said, they've got the biggest BS meter, and other people within the organization are going to know that. So if the Inquisitor starts to look positively at you, your organization, and the proposal that you're putting forward, others will start to take note and they'll go, wow, X, who's the Inquisitor, is coming on side with this. So, there must be something pretty good about it. Or they've definitely gone through and they've analysed where the BS might be in that proposal or where the holes are. So, yeah, that's a great person to get on side because, as I said, it will help you overcome some of the negative archetypes that you'd have inside.
So we haven't really talked much about the Sage yet. You've got the change agents of Champion, Sage, and Inquisitor. Tell us a little bit more about the Sage and how do you win them over?
The Sage is a visionary. And, they're someone that seeks to understand, if you like, the power of the idea that you're putting forward, and they're looking for the true potential of the proposal. So they respond to the big picture and they respond to the scope of the possibility that you're putting forward. So they focus on the vision and their ideas people. So the stories that you need to tell, they need to, again, I mentioned success stories, but they need to be looking at more than just maybe what it is that the client thinks they need. You're looking at being able to show them stories that will take them outside of that narrow thinking that the organization might have. In the book, we talk about the organization Wentworth Bank looking to overcome a cybersecurity problem. But when the heroine goes in and starts to look at this, she takes it much broader than that, and she starts to look at how they can improve the customer experience, how they can improve the products they take to market by introducing a different form of cybersecurity. Taking those sorts of stories to the Sage, that's the visionary. They open up and they're starting to look at what we're looking at here is not just what we want, but what we need. So you're looking at those sorts of stories that will show the future state and how that can be realized.
Is it safe to say, Wayne, that if you are in this complex B2B sale and you come across these three gatekeepers, and I keep calling them gatekeepers because in storytelling, those are the ones that either let you in or let you out or test you along the way. You want to obviously show up with the champion, those that are really on your side. And if you end up with a negative champion, now you've got your work cut out for you. I would imagine then the next one would be Sage. If you can't get to that champion that's on your side, let's get the Sage involved. But it's probably that Inquisitor that's really going to put you to the test. Do you have an example of where you have come across, or maybe one of your customers have come across one or all three of these gatekeepers and how they overcame it?
A great example goes right back to an early part of my career with the Sage. We were selling, or we were a telecommunications company just after deregulation here in Australia. And one of the problems that we had was we were working with one of the cruise lines over here, a large global cruise line, but their Australian operation. And the the CIO at the time was fairly reluctant to make any change. What I was able to do is through a fair bit of discovery, a fair bit of work in the organization, I found a guy that was very open to where the future of that organization was going as far as their marketing was concerned. And we sold them on the bigger picture of putting in, which is very old school now in telecommunications, but it was quite modern then, was the first virtual private network. So taking out all of their hardware and putting it all into our network. And with that, they were able to see the marketing benefits they could get. They could see that the sustainability of that long term was great because they didn't have to go into other hardware. They saw the cost savings. And this guy happened to be a general manager in a different area altogether. But he was well respected in the organization. So he did see this bigger picture. And by us working together, he was able to then guide me to different people within the organization that had different needs, but also help me understand how to approach them to sell this bigger picture, which he really saw as a great competitive advantage in the marketplace for them. And as it turned out, it was. And it was interesting. They didn't implement some of the services that they thought they would want and use. But several years later, they were still talking about these things, the future that they bought, even though they weren't using it all. So this Sage was instrumental in me closing that deal.
It's interesting as you were telling that story, I was thinking of, and I'll leave the client name out of it, but it's headquartered in America. It's a multinational spice company. So chances are you probably cook with some of their spices out there in Australia. And I was first brought in to work with their leadership team in storytelling, and I had very much of a champion. She had done her homework. She and I got on a call. I explained how I did it, went about it, and she said, all right, let's do this thing, and brought me in. And I spent a day out there and had great success with their leadership. She was so excited about it, and the leaders were, we're going to bring you back. Well, she had left then about 2 months later, and the machine, it was already in motion. I was already coming back. I was handed off then from a champion to an inquisitor. And here was now someone that took over the role, and I had to prove myself all over again. And I don't feel like I ever actually did prove myself out to that inquisitor. I was brought back in. We had another day-long training. It went well, but then the door had closed. I did not win over that inquisitor. And in you explaining these different archetypes, it was the first time right here sitting with you, I go, aha, that's what happened in this company. I had one over, and I could not win the inquisitor over.
Yeah. So how did you go with that? I mean, what direction did you take with that, Park? I mean, it's difficult if you haven't won that inquisitor over, but you obviously won the business.
Well, I went in the second time, and I spent a day out there with their leadership team, a morning session with one group and an afternoon session with the other group. And Wayne, I'll tell you, I probably tried even harder in those training sessions to try to win them over, and I'm not sure that worked for me.
Yeah.
I think the first time I came in, I was just me. I was authentic. I just did my thing. And the second time I was in, I was probably pressing too hard. I think it was fine. I mean, I got a lot of great reviews on it, whatever, but I was not invited back after that. The inquisitor, that gatekeeper, left me out after that. So I don't know what else I would have done. I probably would do the exact same thing again. I would just try to go in and give it my all and win them over.
Yeah, and you're a storyteller, Park. So I think about that. And one of the things that I find with an inquisitor is, and I'm probably oversimplifying this, but they're asking the why questions. why is it like this? Why are you approaching it like this? Why have you done this? And the way I try and come back to that is with, again, examples of where we may have had success or addressed that issue in the past. And also feeding back to them what if questions. So, why have you done this? Well, we've done this because with our experience, we've found XYZ. Now, what would happen if you didn't do that? And throw it back. And you're actually then the inquisitor, I find in most instances, will respect you for challenging them because you're not just backing off. And I guess some of them actually get a lot of satisfaction of seeing you squirm in the chair. And, by coming back to them with those success stories and throwing the questions back at them as to the what if you didn't do this, that then, what's the risk associated, or what's the risk associated with a delay? Throw those things back. And the inquisitor, I think, in a lot of instances, will respect you for the challenge back to them.
And if they don't, you're sunk. Has been my
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, the champion may have the opportunity or the influence and the power to override the thoughts of an inquisitor. But if you haven't got them on board, that's really difficult. So, the way I look at it, if you haven't got a champion on board on your side, ready to help you get through all of the gatekeepers that they're finding, you might as well not go in there. So you've got to have a champion. And that champion needs to be someone that, has got the power to make decisions and make a decision for the greater good of the company rather than any personal influence or any personal gain.
All right, so we've covered the change agents, the champions, the sages,
Yep.
and the inquisitors. Let's jump over to the advocates. You said they don't necessarily have the power, but they can help bring you up. Are these kind of the middle manager, marching soldiers that do have a bit of influence in there, and people do listen to
Yep.
them? They're just not at the high level yet.
Yeah, exactly. And they can introduce you to the higher level. And we break it into three. We have a mercenary, we have an accomplice, and we have a messenger. And I guess the mercenary is the most interesting out of them. The mercenary focuses on what's in it for me. They're the ones that are responding to vanity and personal advancement. That's where they're sitting. And I think all of us have come across mercenaries when we've been either having them sit alongside us at work, or we've had to deal with them in a sale that we've been making. And and they're looking for, where can I get the best gain out of this for myself? Now, sometimes that might be a bit unethical. Other times it might not be unethical, but they're just looking for the decision that's going to help them progress the most out of their involvement there.
What is a win for you? I mean, it's pretty straightforward in sales. Before we dive
Yep.
into what they're absolutely looking for, I always ask, and I don't care if I'm talking to a champion, a sage, a inquisitor, but in your describing of the mercenary, it seems to me that's like question number one. If everyone, when I am
Yeah.
done and they leave that room and they are giving you a high five, what does that win look like, and what do I need to do to get them there?
Yeah. The problem with a mercenary, butt park, is that they won't necessarily open up and be honest about that, because they're the sort that they're likely to look at two proposals or two organizations submitting a proposal, and they're going to look for the one that's going to do them the best. They don't have the best interest of the organization at heart. So, you could ask them that, and they could come back with BS and not be open and honest about what it is that they are looking for. They're not going to say that. Very rarely they'd open up and say, well, I'm looking for the thing that's going to do the best for my career. They may do, but unlikely. So that's where your, as a salesperson, your BS radar needs to be really finely tuned so that you understand where those people fit and what they're coming back with. So, you know, you need to be talking to them in a way that you're building up their profile, you're building up the vanity, that's what they respond to. And if you're going to be telling stories to that person, they need to be stories about how other people have supported the approach that you've taken and what it's done for their career or what it's done for them within the organization. So they're the sorts of things that I think that we need to look at. They come in and they say, okay, we've got this problem. How do I get us, and they may be someone that's identifying the problem and therefore getting some kudos there. If they then help solve the problem that they've identified, they get more kudos. So, you've got to look at how you can position yourself with that. So it becomes a balancing act. It becomes, well, even more than a balancing act. There's a lot of detective work going on here as you work through this, and you need to use the other people, like an advocate, for example, or a messenger, to be able to help you get through that.
Do you have a good mercenary story for us when you have come across one or one of your customers have?
I had a mercenary in a finance company that I was working with once, and it was a global finance company. And again, it's part of my telecommunications experience. And what actually happened was we'd been with this organization for some time, and they were coming up to review the contract. And this mercenary at the time was really sitting back and watching what was happening. He wasn't prepared to make a decision. He wanted to see what way the wind was blowing, and then he'd jump on board. I actually helped him identify a problem that they'd been experienced. And I'd been told this problem by a messenger, someone that likes the gossip, that likes to be in the know, that likes to tell the story. And she'd actually mentioned to me some issues that they were having. I fed this back to the mercenary, and he then took it back to his boss. And that gave him kudos internally. And his boss said to him, well, why don't you see what you can do about finding some solutions to this? Well, because I'd fed him that information, he came back to me and said, well, how would you suggest we do something about it? And that was part of the solution we were putting forward anyhow. But we were able to put him in a position where he was able to present that back. And that gave him the kudos. And that was what he wanted. But it also helped us position ourselves with the Inquisitor and the champion.
Absolutely. You help the mercenary get what they want. And then by doing so, they would turn around and bring you in to do your work so that you get what you want. But you have to place their interests first and foremost.
Absolutely. And again, stories helped us there because we were able to tell them how others had seen problems as we were working together, and we were able to help them identify and build out those problems so that they could take them as if it was them having identified it, and then being able to say, well, as part of this solution, this is going to identify the problem that we've identified here as well.
So you had a messenger involved there, and that's one of the archetypes
Yeah.
under the advocates. Let's talk about the messenger then.
Yeah, look, the messenger believes that I think it was Francis Bacon that said information is power, or knowledge is power. And that's the messenger. The messenger sees information as being power. They like to get information that other people don't have. As I said, they respond to being in the know, and they're a great person to act as an intermediary for a salesperson between themselves and the organization. So without it being seen as, I guess, unethical, a messenger is someone that you can use to feed information back into the organization. So if you're working with them, you can offer them information that you want others to know, and you can do that by a story as well, because again, they like the gossip, so they will go and tell a story. Oh, do you know I was talking to so and so and this? So you can use that. And there are also people that, without necessarily breaking any confidence internally, they're anxious, if you've got a good relationship with this person, to be able to tell you what's happening in the politics within that organization as well. So they're a really good connection to have because they can be your communicator.
They are the gossips, and yet in a very positive way. All right, how about the accomplices?
Yeah, look, the accomplice, I think the accomplice is probably the most interesting archetype out of all of them. The accomplice is someone that looks to help other people find a solution, and they focus on relationships and open dialogue. If you make a good relationship with an accomplice, you're then in a position where that person's going to be a strong advocate for you. And if they're well connected, if their superior, for example, is close to a change agent or is a change agent, this person is going to be able to help you get to them. And they're very, very strong because, as I said, they see partnerships as being very, very important. So there, if you get an accomplice and work with them, that person will walk you through that organization and guide you to who are the right people and advise you where you may be seeing roadblocks. So, you need to be feeding that person the sorts of stories that they can then take up to the others. The visionary, the sage, for example, give them visionary stories that when they're talking to the sage, they can be saying, sharing stories about the success and the broader success that you've had with organizations. The cost of delay. If we don't do things, this is what's going to happen. So you give them all of that information that you want to get back, not just through the messenger who's just going to drip feed it when they think that it's going to serve them, but the accomplice is going to do it to help you.
So we have these 6 archetypes, and you've got the advocates now. We're talking about mercenary, accomplice, and messenger. Will the advocates actually hire you, or do you need the advocates to push you up to the change agents of champion, sage, and inquisitor who will actually make the hiring decision?
Yeah, look, it depends on the organization you're working with, Park. In the book, we talk about a decision making unit and a decision making process. In the book, the accomplice is part of a group that's doing evaluation, but then they just make recommendations up to the decision making unit. And the DMU is very much involved with those change agents. That's the C suite. It's the people that they may not necessarily be able to say yes on their own, but they can definitely say no on their own. Because they can throw a spanner in the works and really mess things up for you. So that accomplice really needs to help you get to those change agents. And that's very much, we've got a guy in the book called Raf Singh, and he's very much on board with our heroine, and he's done it through her really establishing herself as a domain expert, that he's then encouraged to introduce her to someone that actually ends up being the champion. They don't know that early, but it develops that way. So the accomplice, if you like, they can be your foundation. And on top of that foundation, they build those introductions to the change agent and will give you information to support the decisions that are being made up at that level. They will be able to tell you, yeah, look, this is going the right direction or it's not. And, there's nothing surreptitious about this. There's nothing unethical. It's about managing a process to deliver a positive outcome of value to the client.
So, my last question for you, Wayne. In these 6 different archetypes, champion, sage, inquisitor, mercenary, accomplice, messenger, do you have shapeshifters? Meaning you might have an accomplice that actually shapeshifts over to a sage, or a champion that shapeshifts back to the messenger. And do you have to, if so, anticipate that?
Yeah, look, it's highly unlikely that you're going to see a change agent move back to an advocate, shapeshift back to an advocate. But you are going to see mixtures. You will have a champion that could also be an inquisitor. And, I've worked with guys that have been my champion, but they've also pulled my proposals apart. And that's great because they want to know that they're going to go forward with something that is not going to jeopardize them. In the same way, a champion can be a sage, a champion can be that visionary. So I think you can get a mix of change agents as far as the advocates are concerned. You can have a champion that's part sage, you can have a champion that's part inquisitor. Would you have a champion that's a messenger or an accomplice? Yeah, to some extent, but they're not. That's not going to be their primary personality, if you like, for want of a better term. They a good champion can also be an accomplice. Highly unlikely they're going to be a mercenary if you're working with them at that level, because as we said, the champion's looking at getting the job done, regardless of what is in it for them.
Fascinating. Well, Wayne, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Business of Story and share your new book, The Wentworth Prospect, a novel guide to success in B2B sales. And I really love the fact that you were open for me to focus, because the book covers so many different areas, but to focus on these archetypes. We just haven't done that here in 6 years of the Business of Story. And I think it's really, really fascinating. So thanks for taking the time. Where can people learn more about you and the book?
Well, the book they can get wherever they do their book shopping, but obviously Amazon's probably the most popular these days. So they can go onto Amazon and they can look for it in print, ebook, or audiobook. And for me, jump onto LinkedIn and send me a connect request, and I'll jump on there and share thoughts and ideas with you. And that's, my spelling of my name's a little different. It's Moloney. Happy to jump on and share thoughts and ideas and stories with anyone that would like to on B2B selling.
Well, Wayne Maloney, thank you so much for being here.
Park, thank you. It's been a pleasure, mate. I thoroughly enjoyed it and look forward to sharing more stories with you as the time goes by.
I look forward to that as well. And thank you all for listening to this edition. If you like what you heard, certainly share it out with your colleagues, friends, family, anyone that you think would really benefit, especially if they're in sales, of understanding who that archetype, that personality is sitting across from you, and what stories you have to tell from their point of view to get them to see the world your way, to buy in what you have to offer. If I could be of service to you, come on over to the Business of Story. I've got all kinds of tips, talents, techniques there ready for you to craft and tell compelling stories that sell. If you have not yet taken my The ABTs of Selling course, check it out over at businessofstory.thinkific.com. You can apply the ABTs to everything Wayne talked about here today. Once you identify who that archetype is you're selling to and what stories that you have to use to be able to see the world, get them to see the world your way, the ABT will help you do that. So check it out at businessofstory.thinkific.com. And remember to come on back next week when we will have another story artist right here for you like Wayne. And until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.